Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and the second of a double bill. If you haven't gone and watched it yet, go and watch the show we did this morning with Dr. Kate Vigers. That was a cracking chat about SOE in France, in Europe, sorry. But anyway, a few weeks ago, I was sitting in a bar in Ouistreham with Stephen Fisher, and here we both are discussing Sword Beach and the battle for that very location. If you haven't got it yet, what are you waiting for? Stephen Fisher's Sword Beach book. There's my copy there. I know lots of you have already bought it. You've already been discussing it in the sidebar, but it's one of the main parts of the book. And now here he is to go into even more detail with even more photos. So good evening, Stephen. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thanks, Woody. Thank you for having me on again. And evening, everyone. Nice to see lots and lots of people in the sidebar. Oh god,
it's a popular one. So let's not have a preamble. Let's just get straight into Sword Beach and Ouistreham. And it's one of those battles I kind of feel I know it a little bit, but I found out a lot more in the book, and I guess I'll find out a little bit more again today. So good, all is good.
Well, yeah, it's the Battle for Ouistreham, and I kind of coined that name for it. Is something that I think gets overlooked quite a bit in the histories. It usually gets a line, perhaps, in most of the books that have been published. And it was after I got the contract to write this book, it was the first chapter that I wrote. And I'd written lots of samples and bits of this book already, but this was the first complete chapter I wrote. And as I explored it more, I realized just how interesting it is as an actual action. And I kind of feel it doesn't get a massive amount of attention. And I think every time we discuss D-Day, we have to go back to this film, The Longest Day, and the depiction of the commandos on D-Day is very much the main narrative of what happens on Sword Beach. And Peter Lawford starring as Brigadier Lord Lovett sort of bypasses what's happening in Ouistreham, because of course Lovett, and this is true, they all head directly to Pegasus Bridge, and then they advance into the British airborne sector. But there's this other commando unit, 4 commando unit, that are given their own individual mission. And I kind of find it ironic that it's not featured in The Longest Day, because it's actually one of the best recorded actions that happens on Sword Beach, courtesy of the Army Film and Photographic Unit. And there's actually some really good coverage of what happens in Ouistreham on that day. But it's always been, I kind of feel, a touch overlooked. And you do pick up bits in people's memoirs of the people who were there, any veterans of 4 Commando or the French commandos. And a couple of books give it a little bit of attention. The history of 4 Commando, for instance, covers it. But the more I explored, the more I realized just how much there is to tell about it. And so it became quite a big chapter in book. And yeah, I think it's probably my favorite chapter, but maybe that's because it was the one I wrote first. But anyway, let's have a look at exactly why Ouistreham was being attacked. Some people will no doubt recognize this map, one of the intelligence maps produced in the Royal Navy's battle summary of Normandy. And this shows all of the different coastal batteries along the Normandy beaches and the range of their artillery pieces, or the anticipated range based on the belief of what armament there was in all of the different gun batteries. And our target for today is down there in the corner at Ouistreham, on the eastern end of Sword Sector, right next to the Caen canal and the River Orne, where they come out into the sea. And here there was a battery of 6 155mm guns, and they had a significant range across the beach area, all the way over. In fact, they could probably have shelled some of the landings on Gold Beach, but they would definitely have been able to target some of the ships, if not all of the ships, in the anchorages off Juno and Sword Beach, where Force J and Force S were anchoring, preparatory to lowering their landing craft and heading into the beach. So this was a target that definitely needed neutralizing. Now, there's a big plan for this, of course. At 5 a.m. on the morning of D-Day, Free Group RAF with, I think, 5 squadrons of Lancaster bombers flew over Ouistreham and bombed it very, very heavily as a prelude to knocking out this gun battery. And then, of course, Force D, the bombardment squadron that accompanied Force S down into the the Bay of Seine, bombarded this battery as well. It was one of the designated targets for, oh crikey, I've forgotten. It was one of the cruisers. It wasn't Ramillies or Warspite. But either way, it was being very heavily targeted. During the pre-landing bombardment as well, when all of the destroyers open up, it was ships like Scorpion that are targeting this particular sector of the beach, again with the anticipation of neutralizing it. And then the 8th Air Force, the US Air Force, pass over, bombing this area of Ouistreham. Their actual target, it was 100 Bomb Group, who of course have most recently been in Masters of the Air, the Apple TV series. They were given the objective of targeting Ouistreham, although their actual target was a strong point just about 500 meters west of the actual battery itself, strong point 10, which may have been a bit of faulty intelligence or a bit of faulty planning, because that wasn't really a target that was worth bombing, being a couple of bunkers. The battery itself would have been a far more valuable target. Either way, that didn't really make much difference, because all of their bombs pretty much missed, because they dropped their bombs further inland. But it doesn't really matter whether they'd hit on, and whether or not the cruisers had hit, whether the destroyers had hit, whether Free Group had hit, because the only way you can be certain that a coastal battery has been properly neutralized is sending infantry in and making sure that those guns have been properly destroyed. And only then can you leave that battery safe in the knowledge that the Germans won't be able to return to it and reoccupy the gun positions and bring the guns back into action. And Ouistreham, sitting just 1 mile east of the Sword Beach landing area, really did need to be neutralized, because otherwise it would be a very painful thorn in the flank of the landings as all of these units start to advance inland. So there was a lot of intelligence about this battery. The Allies knew what they were looking at. They knew the layout of the gun positions. They knew the defenses inland behind it. They had a good idea of the unit that was defending it. And so they allocated this to one of the commandos that would be landing on Sword Beach, part of the 1st Special Service Brigade. And the objective was given to 4 Commando. So the plan was 4 Commando, who are going to be landing at the eastern end of Sword Beach, where that green circle is up there, would need to attack and neutralize the gun battery right over there next to the ferry terminal in the red circle. That was the location of this coastal battery. Codenamed, well, the German name for it was Siedelstrandel number 8. The Allies codenamed it Strongpoint Bass, one of the fish themes that they had. There was cod, skate, I can't remember half of the others, sole, trout. So yeah, this one was bass, a fish type. Now there were 2 other targets in between as well, Strongpoint 10 on the left and the famed casino, which is part of the Strongpoint Bass strongpoint, if you like. And these also needed to be neutralized. Strongpoint 10 because it had an arc of fire along the beach towards the landings at Sword, so it needed to be neutralized. And the strongpoint at the casino would be a thorn in the side of 4 Commando when they were attacking this strongpoint as well. So these were allocated to the 2 French troops, 1 troop and 8 troop of 10 Intra-Allied Commando, who were attached to 4 Commando for this operation. Now, for reasons of time, I'm going to kind of not talk about them because otherwise we'll be here all night. But I can probably do a mini talk at another date on them. I've got all of the slides, but honestly, if I left them in here, then this talk would go on forever. And besides, everyone knows the story of the French commandos on D-Day because you've all seen The Longest Day. And it is probably one of the best scenes in the film, that aerial panning shot as hundreds, well, dozens of French commandos pour onto the streets of Ouistreham, which is actually Port-en-Bessin, of course, and race towards this ornate casino, this very elaborate building, which is very well depicted, but of course didn't look like that. It was a strong point. But that is...
You'll be telling me there's no nuns now as well, just to...
Should I tell you that? Do I have to break another heart? And I think most people know there were no nuns. There was no nunnery in Ouistreham that I'm aware of. I don't know where that story came from because it's not in the book, so it must have just been created for the film.
Yeah.
But you know, that's Hollywood, isn't it? So Yeah, we'll gloss over them, and we'll have a look at what 4 Commando actually do, because their story isn't told in the longest day. So when it came to writing this up, I could fall back on several useful sources to establish the facts. First, there's 4 Commando's war diary, which of course is always one of the first things that you go to when you want to understand an action. War diaries can be very hit and miss. Sometimes they're incredibly useful. Sometimes they are very vague and simple. I mean, some of the war diaries for Sword Beach literally just say, landed at Queen Red Beach, advanced inland. Really? This is the biggest event in history and you've dealt with it in one line. Happily, 4 Commando's war diaries stretches for several pages for the 6th of June. So there is a lot of useful information in there. There are gaps, though, and one of the things that the war diary lacks is the operational order given to 4 Commando for this plan. So I haven't found it anywhere. There is no paperwork that actually outlines what 4 Commando's objectives are or their plan. And that's a bit of a gap, because without knowing the plan, it's very hard to then piece together what happens. You can use the plan as a basis and then examine exactly what happened. Now, fortunately, there are some other sources of information, and the Army Film and Photographic Unit, Sergeant Norman Clagg, he actually filmed 4 Commando, and this is their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Dawson, with his commando knife stabbing a big aerial photographic map of Ouistreham. And he filmed this map in great detail whilst Dawson was giving a briefing, which is really, really useful, because you can just see faintly on this overhead, there are a couple of arrows that indicate the routes that 4 Commando and the French commandos were going to take into Ouistreham itself. And that was gold dust, because that at least gave me a physical depiction of the plan, where they intended to go, how they were going to attack this battery. And the basic plan, once you study this film footage and the map, is that they were going to advance inland, take the main road from the landing areas behind the beaches into Ouistreham as the Avenue Lyon-sur-Mer, and then attack the strong points from behind. So 4 Commando on the far right are going to attack the battery, and the French commandos, that arrow in the middle, are going to attack the casino and strong point number 10. And that's exactly what the film footage of the briefing map depicts. Now, there's other sources of information that I can turn to as well. There are the intelligence maps that were produced by the British and all of the Allies of the defences behind the beaches and inland and here in front of Ouistreham. And all of that blue stuff you can see is all of the detail of what they were expecting to find in Ouistreham. So there's a key for all of this, but there's basically depicted on there, there's an anti-tank ditch, there's numerous concrete and open gun emplacements, there's barbed wire defenses, there's minefields, there's flooded areas. So there's all sorts of information on this, which again helps piece together what we see later on in people's reports, people's reminiscences, and some of the film footage and photographs taken of the area. Other sources of information we can use, there was an awful lot of photography on the day, as I said, and a lot of that was aerial photography. And again, that really helps work out where people are moving, what's happening. Looking at these aerial photographs, it's possible to see damage that has been caused to the area, and also sometimes individual vehicles and that kind of thing, which again helps us trace the route that the Allies are taking. So these are, if you like, the sort of hardcore primary sources. These are the ones that are slightly more definite and the ones that are really, really useful to use. They're not 100% reliable, but you know, the camera does lie, but in this instance, the camera doesn't lie. If there's a view of a tank and you know what time that photo was taken based on the shadows cast by the sunlight, then you know there's some pretty hard evidence that you can work out that tank was there at that time of day and that sort of thing. So this is all really useful stuff. But there is, of course, more information that we can add to these hard sources. Now, it varies in quality, it varies in when it was produced, and so some of it is more reliable than others. But I am, of course, thinking of personal testimony. Yeah. Now, everyone who sees me on Twitter knows that I am very, very cautious with this sort of thing, because some of it is written 60, 70 years after the event, and it is less reliable. But a lot of it is written very soon after the event, and some people do have very good memories. And by cross-referencing the testimony that they give, it's possible to judge the accuracy of some of the information that they give and you know, fit it all in. And so when it came to writing the story of Ouistreham, there's all sorts of people I could fall back on. So top left, Robert Dawson, next to him, Bill Bidmead, one of the privates in the commando, Pat Porteous, VC, Donald Gilchrist, the adjutant to 4 Commando. They've all written memoirs or statements about what had happened. Murdoch McDougall, middle left, he wrote a very lengthy memoir, one of the first memoirs written by a member of 4 Commando. Joseph Patterson, the doctor in 4 Commando, an unpublished memoir in the Imperial War Museum archive. Irving Portman, one of the sergeants, he left an unpublished memoir. We've also got the French troops, so there's Kiefer over on the right, and then bottom left, Alexander Lofi. One of the civilians, Odette Musset, who ran the Normandy Hotel. And then there's the Germans as well. They left some statements in prisoner of war statements that were given just a few days after the battle for Normandy, after they'd been captured. So Helmut Schmidt was one German who was captured in the battle for Ouistreham. And the information that he could leave wasn't great. Sorry, wasn't incredibly detailed, but it still adds just a little bit to the story. And yeah, that's who's blanked because I don't have a picture of him. And then there's one other person who left us all sorts of useful information. That's Sergeant George Laws of the Army Film and Photographic Unit. Yeah. And he is the person who did all of this incredible documentation of what happens in the Battle of Ouistreham, because he went with 4 Commando armed with a film camera rather than with a weapon. And some of the stuff that he captures is brilliant. And that pretty much forms the basis, if you like, of working out the story of the Battle for Ouistreham. So if we follow that story through using his film footage, I haven't got the film footage in this presentation, but hopefully in the description beneath the video that everyone's watching, you'll find a link to the complete film on the Imperial War Museum archive. It's only about 5 minutes long because he only has so much film to actually use, so he has to be very sparing with what he's recording. But he does capture some brilliant footage, first of the commandos going into the shore, carried by landing craft assault. This is one of the most famous shots, I think, of the landings. I think these commandos appear in every bit of film footage that shows D-Day, often mistaken to be Canadians for reasons I haven't worked out, but this very definitely 4 Commando is very definitely shot by George Laws. The man in front has been identified as probably a dozen different people. I can't remember who I think he is. He's one of the sergeants, but safe to say that he was British rather than Canadian. And Laws films the men as they get ready to go in. You can see they're probably still quite far out at sea here because they're all stood up. As they get into the beach, they will have hunkered down as machine gun fire will have been targeted at them. As they came in for their landing. Now their landings, well, I see a question from Baskerville that I'll just quickly answer. Did commandos go into battle wearing their berets rather than their helmets? 4 Commando did not wear their berets. So it's quite famous that Lovett said everyone should wear their berets when they went in to instill unit pride and that sort of thing. 4 Commando are going into an urban fighting environment. And Dawson said he gave everyone the option to wear their helmets if they want. This is the only piece of significant urban fighting on D-Day, because this is the largest town that is fought over across all 5 beaches, bigger than St. Mary-Glees, bigger than anywhere else. And quite rightly, I think, the Commando wear their helmets in the main because they are going into an area where there's going to be far more debris flying around while they're fighting over it. So yeah, in the main, you'll see the pictures and the film footage, they are wearing their helmets. Now their landing area, this is Queen Red Beach, so the left-hand side of the Sword landing area. And the most significant feature on Queen Red is Strongpoint Cod, or Weedle Strandle Nest number 20, which is on the right-hand side there. And that's just left of the center of the beach. 4 Commando are going to be landing right over on the far eastern side, so that left-hand circle, right at the very end of Queen Red Beach, the very eastern end of the landing area. And they're landing in front of 2 major features. One, on the right-hand side of that circle, is the ruins of a holiday camp, a sort of beach holidays, vacation site. But on the left of that little oval is another strong point, Withdrawal nest number 18, codenamed Skate by the British, which contained a bunker, quite a large concrete bunker, and several smaller positions. And that, of course, brings down fire on the commandos when they land. And Laws captures the men as they duck for cover behind a smoke screen as they make their way up the beach. One of the problems with this footage is, of course, it's silent, and so it's very hard to capture the intensity of the action that they're facing. But you can see all of these commandos have ducked down very quickly. That's because they're coming under fire from strongpoint Skate over on their left flank. Now, strongpoint Skate still survives to some extent. You can see in this shot looking east towards Ouistreham, on the left-hand side of that is the Commando Memorial that commemorates 4 Commando and the French commandos because they landed in this vicinity. And on the right, you can see the concrete bunker that housed the 75mm anti-tank gun on D-Day and has now been incorporated into somebody's house. Now, from everything I've managed to work out, the 75mm had been disabled by the time 4 Commando came ashore. But just behind that bunker, so on the right-hand side of it, on a sand dune, was a machine gun nest. And that pins down 4 Commando for a short while until, what was his name? Lieutenant Carr, I think it was, in command of the support troop. The support troop was B troop of 4 Commando. Neutralized it with a hand grenade in what witnesses said was a sort of classic battle school maneuver, a cricket bowling arm where he lobbed the grenade up into the machine gun nest and knocked it out. Now, the fact that strongpoint Skate was still active was something of a sore point amongst 4 Commando for a while, because they had been told that it would be neutralized by the 2nd East Yorks Battalion, the assault battalion landing on Queen Red Beach. And this kind of gives rise to the start of this rumor that 2nd East Yorks dug in on the beach and didn't really achieve much. What Sergeant Law's film footage captures is an interesting detail that hasn't received much publicity until now, I think, when I put it in my book. He actually captures the 2nd East Yorks Reserve Company's landing. Now, they were supposed to have landed about 10 minutes before 4 Commando and 20 minutes after the assault companies of the 2nd East Yorks. But here you see them coming ashore. These aren't commandos. They don't have the haversacks on. The man with the flag is popularly believed to be carrying the battalion colours. But it is very definitely infantry rather than commandos coming ashore. And that is fully in line with what's reported by the Royal Navy flotillas that landed the reserve battalions of the 2nd East Yorks. And they say there in plain text, they landed late. They touched down 15 minutes behind schedule at 8:05. And this is about 10 minutes after 4 Commando was due to land. So 4 Commando in their memoirs give the 2nd East Yorks quite a hard time for not neutralizing strongpoint Skate. But as Sergeant Law's footage shows, and when you tie that in with the reports being given by the Navy, that's because they weren't all there. Only the 2 assault battalions had landed. They had their own objectives, which are largely focused around cod, and they were very heavily cut down as they made their assault landing. And the fact is that, yes, the 2 other companies that are supposed to be helping to neutralize Skate come in after 4 Commando, not before them. And nobody in 4 Commando seems to have realized that.
And a couple of questions came in earlier, Stephen. Sorry to interrupt you. Jamie Lundy asked, did my grandfather's ship ORP Slazak provide support to 4 Commando? That's the Polish vessel.
No, I don't think so. Slazak was largely supporting 41 Commando over at Lyon-sur-Mer on the
Right.
western end of the landings. And Slazak did give very heavy support to 41 Commando later on in the day. And I recount it in the book because the naval bombardment officer attached to 41 Commando calls up Slazak and just begs pretty much for fire. They're supposed to be giving observed fire, so he should be able to see the positions that he's calling down fire on, but the situation for 41 Commando was quite desperate in the afternoon, and he just asked, please hit these coordinates, and Slazak did obligingly until they were very, very low on ammunition. So the support they gave was crucial. Slazak as well was one of the 2 destroyers that actually goes forward with the assault battalions during the initial landing, advances almost up to the beach, pouring fire on until 5 minutes before HR. So Slazak's role is really big in beach. But no, not as far as I'm aware was she giving any support to 4 Commando. She wasn't allocated to them.
Okay,
no problem. So yes, so the whole story of Second East Yorks being ineffective is then carried on by other commandos, not least Lord Lovett, who recounts seeing the men dig in on the beach and that sort of thing. And it's a really unfair treatment of the battalion that suffered the single most casualties on Sword Beach on D-Day. The Second East Yorks get the most hammered, and really I think in my book as well, but also Dr. Tracy Craggs in her book about the Second East Yorks, this was published last year based on her PhD thesis. She also makes the point that it's just it's largely a clouded judgment of history. What Lovett probably saw was the beach groups digging in, and what 4 Commando were led to believe was that the Second East Yorks had just failed to do their job, when in fact it wasn't their fault because they came ashore later than they were intended to. So that was a nice thing to be able to work out and establish that, yeah, actually the true story of what was happening on Sword Beach at that particular time isn't what was being recounted in people's memoirs, and that has been passed down through memoirs and become, one of those stories of D-Day that's been repeated in popular history now as well. Anyway, back to our commandos. So the commandos get off the beach with Lieutenant Carr knocking out the machine gun post. They're able to advance. Here we see the commandos advancing through the ruins of the holiday camp. And they move from here up to their forming up place, which is on one of the roads just behind here, outside this delightful manor that still stands today. And there is a memorial there to the French commandos again. There are memorials to the French commandos every 100 meters to record the fact that this is where they formed up before they make their advance. And after this, Sergeant Laws gets his camera into action again, and this is where he starts recording some absolutely brilliant footage of the troops advancing down the avenue of Lyon-sur-Mer. And here we can see the small tram line that runs between Ouistreham and Lyon-sur-Mer, and as they progress along the road, numerous buildings are depicted. We see the commandos sprinting variously, walking more slowly in some instances, and then he captures the armor catching up. And these are tanks of B Squadron of the 13th, 18th Hussars. They're DD tanks. As you can see, they've got the skirt that's now collapsed down around them. They weren't actually allocated to support 4 Commando, but they just kind of got mixed in and went down with them, which, very sporting, I think, which is actually...
It's a bit of an edge, doesn't it? Having a few Sherman tanks can never hurt, can it? Yeah.
And it was quite useful, actually, because not all of the Centaur tanks of the Royal Marine Armoured Support Group had managed to get ashore. So having this armour certainly helped 4 Commando in their advance. Now, working out where some of this footage was shot is quite easy, actually. Even this one that looks quite hard to ascertain, you can just see a building on the right-hand side there, and that building is still there today. It's surrounded by other houses, so it doesn't have quite the same open area, but it means I could work out where this photo was taken. That building with the slanted roof opens into a farm courtyard, so we can pinpoint exactly where that film footage was shot. And then this building on the right, that sort of half-timbered house behind the red car, that is not far away from the start area. You can see it in this piece of the film footage. And looking at where that house is, I can work out that that is about 100 yards away from the forming up point where the commando had turned onto this road. So they'd only just started at this point and made their way 100 yards, 100 meters or so down the road. And this is where we can start adding more information to the story as well, because Joseph Patterson, the doctor of 4 Commando, recounts in his unpublished memoir that the road was under heavy mortar fire, and I came on 6 of our men lying dead only about 100 yards along the road at the corner of the copse. And the corner of the copse, I think, that he's talking about are those trees over there, because everything on the left-hand side going out of frame is a sort of open garden, and then there's this copse just behind the wall. And there you can actually see a gathering of people up against the wall. And it's very tempting to think that that might actually be what he is describing. And amongst those 6 men, in fact, was one of his own orderlies, a lance corporal who had been killed in this mortar stonk. And now, if you look, you suddenly see all of this detritus along the road. Now, some of that are tree branches, masonry, that sort of thing, but some of it is indeed people. And making his way along the same road, a little bit further along, in fact, at the next junction, Murdoch McDougall, one of the section commanders in F Troop, he recorded seeing the results of a mortar stonk just ahead of him. And he saw, leaning against the wall, the man with a radio on his back, and he recounted how the signaller rocked back against the wall, turning towards us a face that was just a splash of blood, was a mess of congealed matter, which had been an eye. And I think you have to take these accounts into account when you look at film footage like this, because, as I said earlier, it's silent, so you don't get a sense of the heavy mortar fire that is coming down, the whine of machine gun fire, or the crack of bullets passing by. It almost looks quite peaceful when you watch footage like this with no sound, but in fact this is frontline action. And the commando, some of them are jogging, some of them are slowing down because they've got very heavy kit bags on. You know, they can't run the entire way. It doesn't mean that they're not under fire. And when you start to add people's reminiscences to what this journey was like, it gives this footage a whole new color, I think. And I think it's something that needs to be done. It's not, we shouldn't look at this footage in isolation and just assume that it was an easy cakewalk down this street. After this, the commando carry on their advance. The next major location they come to, where Sergeant Law films them, is the crossroads at what is sort of, if you like, the centre of Ouistreham, the main junction with the road that leads south towards Benoville and Pegasus Bridge, and the road that leads north to the casino and the beach. And here, Laws captures various French civilians, probably members of the local Red Cross groups and that sort of thing. The gent on the left has a helmet on, and they all look very, very happy because they are on the verge of being liberated. So that makes a lot of sense. And he also filmed this gent who seems to be wearing his pajamas. He's got a cigarette in his mouth. He's very happily shaking hands with absolutely everyone that he can reach. And in fact, Murdoch McDougall recounted this man in his memoir. He said on one corner was a cafe, you can see it in the background, in front of which a beaming figure in pajamas was rushing from group to group, cheering and waving "C'est le jour de liberation," the day of liberation. And it's really nice, again, to be able to tie in people's accounts with what we were actually seeing on the film footage that Laws was recording. After this, after they leave this main junction, the commando starts advancing, continuing further east down the road. And here we start to see different units. In fact, here there's a few key details. Obviously, we've got a DD tank again. And then on the right, you can see the commandos walking down the pavement. Now, if you look closely at them, you can see their ammunition pouches. And they are much larger than the normal ammunition pouches, the 1937 pattern webbing. That's because they have the pan magazines for Vickers K guns, and they are part of B Troop, the support group of 4 Commando. So that's useful because this gives us a unit identifier. We can now actually work out which troop those men are from. And in fact, you can see it on the gent on the left as well. So wherever Laws is, he is with B troop at this particular moment in time. And this becomes crucial in a little bit because it led to me realizing something, which means there's a slight error in my book. And now he follows them further down this same road. We can still got the tram line, and you can see the houses on either side of the road. And these houses are very easy to identify. So that house on the right-hand side, we can see there's a sort of tower building on the left, and then there's a house right up on the roadside with the sort of faint outline of a lower roof on it. And that's this house you can see just behind the street sign here.
Yeah.
So again, this is absolutely crucial because we can work out exactly where that film footage was shot, because those buildings are still there. They haven't moved. So we know exactly where Laws stood when he filmed this. And this gets important because in the next scene that he films, just a couple of doors down, the commandos evidently come under fire again because they start sprinting for cover behind the tanks and in the sides of the houses and the gardens as they make their way further east. Now, the reason this is important is because of where it is. So that house I just showed you that we can identify in the modern day, that's over there. And that is not where the commandos were meant to be. The next piece of footage shows the commandos sprinting round a building over a lot of rubble. You can see there's lots of masonry and disturbed earth in the ground just there. And that house in the background, sorry, I should go back again. That house between the two men that you can see just there, that house is still there as well. It's the one on the left, just there. Now, this view is taken from a side road. So at this point, the commandos have turned off the main road leading east, and they are turning up a road that leads to the north. Now, that house is that one on the right-hand circle just there, which means that the road the commandos are advancing up is that road heading north from that right-hand circle. And yeah, basically they've gone east down the road, and then they've taken a hard left. And you can see, if you look underneath those red lines, you see that there's a line of bombs running from northeast to southwest, and there's this huge area of disturbed ground where a stick of bombs have come down and blown up quite a lot of the buildings on that corner. And this ties in with what Murdoch McDougall tells us as well. It says we passed another road, and on the next turning, where this corner is, was an enormous bomb crater through which we scrambled and dashed for the shelter of a wall on the right. On the right, we could see a lighthouse. We seemed very near to it, and I realized we must have come too far along the main road. Now, the lighthouse he can see is the lighthouse at the entrance to the canal in which we could see when we sat in the pub just a few weeks ago.
We could.
And that means, and the next scene, we see the commandos all crouched down by some of the walls whilst they ascertain what their next move will be. So what's happened is, what this means is the commandos have gone east along that road. Now, remember, this map shows the plan, the aerial reconnaissance plan that was filmed by Norman Clegg and showed the anticipated route to the battery. But what's happened is the commandos have gone too far east. They've carried on down that road. They've missed their intended turning, and they've turned north almost right next to the port of Ouistreham, right next to the canal locks entrance. And we can be sure of that now because of where Laws is when he films the houses and when he films that corner and the bomb damage that have been caused, and which ties in beautifully with the aerial photography. Now, this is where I have to own up to an error in my book. Because
no,
I'm
gosh,
sorry. So you should take this and you should throw it away. No, you shouldn't.
We have post-it notes.
I had assumed, based on something that I think it was Donald Gilchrist said in his memoir, it might have been McDougall, that it was just the last two troops, E and F troop, who were at the back of the column of 4 Commando that had gone too far. because he believed that the other commandos ahead of him had taken the correct turning, and that they had sort of in isolation gone off, and they'd followed the tanks, and they thought they'd taken the tanks had gone too far, and they followed them, and so the tanks were in the lead, and the rest of the commandos had gone the correct way. I now think that actually all of the commandos went too far, and that is borne out by the fact that if I go back a couple of slides, I should really have prepared a slide appropriately. These men, you can't really see it in this photo, but the guy nearest the camera, actually in the middle, you can just make out his webbing again, and he's got a huge piece of webbing on the front of him. That's because that's one of the K-gun magazines.
Yeah.
And so he is B troop, and so he has gone too far. It's not just E and F troop. Right. And I also suspect, I'm pretty certain one of the other troops did as well, and I'll come to that a little bit later. Anyway, so the commandos have gone too far, along with the tanks, and we can check this again with the aerial photography taken on D-Day. These photos taken at about 11 o'clock in the morning, 10:50 thereabouts. And it's not easy to see, but where I put all of those red circles, there are tanks. And they're DD tanks, because you can just make out the skirts outlining the shape of the tank. So there's 5 of them there. And again, this ties in with what Murdoch McDougall tells us. Some 50 yards ahead, a tank was lying abandoned on its side. And he says this immediately after they've taken the corner. Now, there's 2 potential tanks that might be, and I can't say for certainty which one it is. It could be that one up at the top. Now, I say that because that tank has been knocked out. You can't tell from that photo, but you can tell because in a photograph taken the next day, or no, sorry, in fact, 2 days later, that tank is still there. It's the only tank of those 5 that is still there. So it must have been knocked out. And I suspect it was probably knocked out by the anti-tank gun over at strongpoint 7, the strongpoint surrounding the locks in Ouistreham. Or he may have, by this point, have turned left to go across the open field, and it was that tank on the left just there. Now, I say it could be that tank because this tank was again filmed by Sergeant George Laws as they ran across that piece of open ground to get back to where they were supposed to be. And this is another piece of quite famous footage. Can work out exactly where it is from the buildings in the background. They're all still there. And from the disturbed earth, you can see that the tank is sort of ditched into a trench, and that trench is visible in that aerial photograph. But in the photograph taken 2 days later, that tank isn't there anymore. And I think actually that tank is still operational. It's just driven into that ditch and probably comes out later. And it's probably just angled its gun to provide a bit of support for the commandos as they go across this piece of open ground. Either way, the commandos move on. Oh, sorry, there we go. Murdoch McDougall refers to this piece of open ground. We had to bear left across an open space to a track, probably the one we had passed before. So the commandos now doubling back to their intended line of advance. And we can follow that again with George Law's film footage confirming that they took this sort of zigzag route back onto the main axis of advance and back onto where they intended to be to come up behind Strongpoint Bass.
Just to interrupt you, because I want to ask a question. That the implication is it's a navigational error. They go too far down the road. But you also said that they came under fire. We saw that in the photo there. And so Capo said, where were the Germans shooting from? What kind of firepower did they have? So is it possible that they continued easterly because they have to deal with something ahead of them that has become an immediate priority, and then move north to the original objective, or is it a mistake?
I think it's a mistake. The reason all of those commandos are ducking for cover behind the tanks in that earlier photograph is because they are now pretty much on the square outside the lock gates where we had a drink, Woody, which is where the next strong point is, the strong point surrounding the lock gates, which is strong point is it strong point 7 or maybe 6? I can't remember, but around there you have various bunkers, a couple of Tobruks, a couple of 50mm anti-tank guns, And yeah, there were Germans ensconced there, and they are at that point, what, about 50 yards from the square, and I think they've come under fire from that strong point. And that's what tips them off to the fact they've gone too far. MacDougall recounts that he was desperately trying to remember the aerial photographs he had studied in advance and looking at each side road thinking, is it that one, is it that one? But he keeps following the units ahead of him instead, and yeah, then realizes at the last minute when he sees the lighthouse they've gone too far. I think from the fire they were taking on this road, they probably wanted to get off of it as soon as possible. So I think it's a mistake.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a navigational error that led them to go too far east. George Law's next bit of footage is taken from here, from an elevated position where he observes several aspects of the strong point. Now, over on the right, you can see that huge block tower. That is the range finding tower that is today the Grand Bunker Museum in Ouistreham, and that is the range finding tower for the battery. You can see some men being led over to the left. They're probably prisoners of war. This film footage is probably shot at the end of the attack on the bunker. Oh, sorry, on the strong point. But one of the best bits of film footage is this, and he just captures these people walking across a little footbridge, and you can see disturbed ground. You can see this house in the foreground has obviously been badly damaged by the bombardment. There's craters, tiles all coming off the roof, and again, tying this in with the aerial photography, we can work out where this is because there's several key features here. So we have in blue what appears to be a big bomb crater. In green, there's this big spilling of sand coming towards Law's and the camera position. In red, we have this little wooden footbridge across a ditch. And in yellow, we have a skylight in the roof of a house. And looking at his view shed, these are the things that he is seeing right in front of him. We can tie that in with an aerial photograph taken on the same day. Again, this is from about 10:50 in the morning, and we can identify the same features. So in blue, there's that big bomb crater. In green, that big splash of sand coming towards the cameraman. There's a little bridge over the ditch in red, and there's a skylight just visible in that building in yellow. And that means that Law's view shed comes back to that point where the yellow circle is, and that tall corner-shaped building, which is this one that on D-Day was the Hotel de Normandy, I think. They're all called Hotel de Normandy. And today is private apartments. But it was there on D-Day. And this again fits in with the record left to us by members of 4 Commando. Bill Bidmead, who was a member of A Troop. A Troop were given the task of supporting the attack that's going to be made on the strong point. Each troop had a particular mission. C Troop had led the advance into Ouistreham. D Troop were going to be the assault troop. A Troop were going to be the supporting fire troop, along with B Troop with all of their K guns. And E and F Troop would exploit D Troop's attack on the battery and attack the gun positions. And Bill Bidmead, in his unpublished memoir, leaves this record. The plan of our K-gun section was to get into a large horseshoe-shaped building overlooking the rear of the battery and open up as soon as we were in position. We were soon in the house and upstairs to the two top rooms, and what a marvellous view we had of the battery. And this is clearly where George Laws has gone to film from at the same time, because it's the same building. He's got the same view as everyone else. He's evidently up there with A and B troops whilst they provide the supporting fire. Meanwhile, D Troop, who are going to be the main assault troop under Captain Pat Porteous, Victoria Cross. So he won the VC for the Dieppe raid. He's now the troop commander of D Troop. His mission then is to make the initial assault on the gun battery. And in order to do that, he first has to look at how to get across this anti-tank ditch. Now, this anti-tank ditch stretches right from the coast all the way up to the casino, which at this moment on the left-hand side is being attacked by the French commandos, but there's no way around it. It's too big a diversion. Now, they'd anticipated this. They knew it was there, so they had brought with them some collapsible bridges, 2 of them, in fact. One was destroyed on the beach, and the other Porteous almost regretted bringing because he said it became a magnet for sniper bullets, and several of his men who were carrying this collapsible ladder had been shot by snipers as a result. And Porteous, he leaves all too brief an account of what happens on D-Day, sadly, but he does leave some details. He recounts how he was talking to a French civilian when he heard mortars coming down, and he dived for cover. The civilian didn't, and the civilian was decapitated by the blast. So there's quite a bit of extra detail that Porteous was able to add, even in this very brief account. Now, he studied this anti-tank ditch rather unhappily as he looked at how wide it was, and knowing that they only had one bridge left with them. It was a significant anti-tank ditch, and this photograph taken a couple of months after D-Day in the collections of the D-Day Story Museum in Portsmouth shows just how wide it is. And I've managed to work out where this is. This is just to the east of the casino, where the anti-tank ditch takes a turn. You can see it's concrete lined. It's a very significant feature. Tripwires in the bottom. No way vehicles are going to get across it, but even infantry are going to struggle because they need to get down into that and then climb up the other side. Quite a smooth surface, all the while probably under fire.
While you've got that photo on there, Stephen, it's worth reminding ourselves generally how much concrete the Germans had poured into Sword Beach. I mean, we talk about Omaha Beach with Michael Ackerman a lot on the channel, and the fact is we do have the majority of the bunkers from Omaha are still there. The majority of bunkers from Utah are still there. Juno and Sword, a lot of them just aren't there anymore, partly as you know from the craters and the damage on D-Day, but also because of just urban redevelopment. So it can lead people to think that there weren't that many defenses there, because you got, as you said, the one the one with the commando memorial, there's one bunker there, but 3/4 of them are missing. And in terms of it being the port, in terms of it being the canal, the river, the north of Caen, it was natural the Germans were going to pour in a lot of concrete there early. So it is very fortified.
Yes, it was. And yeah, like you say, most of it's gone. Strongpoint Cod, it's the single largest strongpoint on all 5 beaches on D-Day.
Yep.
Nothing left except those 2 twin villas, the houses that were reinforced by the Germans and fortified. But there's 3 enclosed concrete anti-tank gun bunkers. They were all removed. The headquarters bunker at the rear and the numerous Tobruks for another 50mm, and at least 3 mortar pits and machine gun posts, all removed. So there's not a single piece of concrete left of Cod, which, as I said, was the largest single strong point on all 5 beaches. And Withdrawal on S20A, which supported it on the right-hand flank, on the west flank, nothing left of that either. The only piece of concrete left on the Sword landing area is that bunker I showed you earlier at Skate, the 75mm bunker. And like you say, it does lead people to think that, oh, actually, this was very lightly defended, and it wasn't at all. And at Ouistreham, all of this has gone. Of the Strongpoint Bass, which we're just getting up to, there's the range finding tower, and there's a small piece of concrete left around the go-kart track. That's about it. There is some more concrete buried in the dunes. So Strongpoint 10, which the French commandos attacked, obviously that's now the base for the Eternal Flame Memorial, the main memorial on Sword Beach. And there are anti-tank blocks buried in the sand on the beach that variously get exposed and then covered up again. And if you look in the dunes, as I did when I met you back in April on the tour I was with Alex Churchill and our small group, as we explored, we did find some of the concrete of Strongpoint 10, which is very nice. But most of it's gone. And like you say, Omaha and Utah, all of those bunkers are still there. Juno, 50% of it's been removed. What's in front of the Juno Beach Centre is part of it, but all of the stuff on the waterfront in front of Courcelles itself on the east side of the port, and almost all of that is gone. So it leads, like you say, to a bit of a false impression that because we can't see anything today, there wasn't much there then. But it's not the case at all.
Yeah.
And this anti-tank ditch, there's no sign of it now at all. Absolutely nothing. But you can see it's a very formidable thing. It's almost not quite a mile long, but a lengthy anti-tank ditch that made access to it absolutely made access into the strong point almost impossible. And this is the situation that Pat Porteous faced as he studied this anti-tank ditch. His heart sank as he tried to think about how they were going to cross it, until he realized that the Germans, in their great quest for efficiency, had left some footbridges across it, little wooden plank bridges, and you can see 2 of them in this aerial photograph, so that they had an easy way to get in and out of the strong point. Now, whether this is for engineers who are carrying out work, because at the time they're building new gun emplacements in the battery, or if it was just so that some of the soldiers could get back into the compound after a night out in Ouistreham, no way of knowing. But either way, they had rather foolishly left some footbridges across the ditch. And one of these is that footbridge you can see in this film footage shot by George Laws. That's the one on the right-hand side of the picture there. It's that one next to the bomb crater. Again, this is gold dust, because now we know exactly where D Troop crossed the anti-tank ditch to make their initial assault on the strong point. It's those 2 bridges, because Porteous says that's exactly what they used. So D Troop at this point then go in, supported by A Troop and B Troop with the heavy weapons, firing from the surrounding houses. Yes, Stewie, I was like a dog in a butcher's. It was very exciting to see it, because last time I was there, which was admittedly a couple of years ago, it wasn't visible. The dunes move a bit. And
they always move. There's always things popping up, out, and then disappearing again. It's quite one of the fun things about living here.
Where was I? Oh yeah, so D Troop, their main role is to make the initial breach into the strong point. They're going to secure a very small bridgehead through which E and F troops, and McDougall is part of F Troop, and the section commanders in F Troop, they will then exploit that bridgehead. E Troop are going to go off to the eastern side of the battery and knock out the free gun positions over there, and F Troop are going to go to the western side of the battery and knock out the free gun positions there. Whilst A and B troops provide covering fire. C Troop, of course, they led the advance in, so they didn't have a designated role at this point, but they'll have been in the buildings providing covering fire as well. So D Troop make their initial assault. They get across the anti-tank ditch and into the strong point. And this photograph, again, taken on D-Day, gives you an idea of the sort of terrain that they are then entering. And here you can see the sort of footprints of several houses that have been demolished. Down on the bottom right, you can see that white square with a little circle in it. That's at a brook. Up in the top left, you can see a circular feature, and another one in the top middle. Those are the gun pits.
Yeah.
There's a line of anti-tank blocks down on the bottom right. But most of all, what you can see there are craters. This place had been hit by the RAF at 5 in the morning. It had been hit by 8th Air Force at 7 in the morning. It had been hit by a cruiser and destroyers. This place was pretty much a lunar landscape of craters. And McDougall, after he follows up D Troop, he says the ground was churned and cratered everywhere, which made it difficult for us to make steady progress, although it probably helped to make us a more difficult target as we bobbed about amongst the huge holes. So they're suddenly entering an area of land that has been absolutely plastered, and is a very sort of uneven space. Now, Bidmead mentions the view that they had across the strong point, and you get a sense of it from this aerial photograph taken a year after D-Day. And here you can see in green the building that Bidmead is in. This is the horseshoe-shaped building that the K guns are set up in. In blue is the range-finding station, the range-finding tower that is still there today, that's now the museum. And then the 6 gun pits, open emplacements, are in red. you get a good idea of the view that Bill Bidmead and the K gun troop had looking over the battery here. But also the open nature of the terrain that the commandos are now having to attack. So all of those craters are really, really useful for them. Now Bidmead again recounts how I was leaning out the top window shooting at everything that moved in the German positions. It did not sink in my excitement what a grand target I made. And yes, he will have done, because the Germans have various entrenched positions. They have Tobruk's, they have pillboxes, and they have men on the roof of that range-finding tower as well. And Bidmead recounts, just after this sentence, I moved my head to one side to reload my rifle, and bang, a bullet just missed my head by a fraction and hit a commando standing on the top of a few stairs leading into the rooms we were in. He was hit in the stomach, practically blowing his back out. And again, this is something that you don't really capture from the film footage that Laws shoots. Again, silent and largely done whenever he was, had the opportunity to poke his head into view. And it's always important to tie in these accounts of what people are experiencing to get a full sense. This was not a walk in the park. This is, a very heavily contested site. This is a very big German strongpoint. It's a coastal battery, anti-tank ditch, barbed wire, machine gun posts all over the place. So this is a proper firefight that D Troop lead as they try and make their advance across the anti-tank ditch to allow E and F troops to exploit. Now D Troop, as they make their attack, one of the things they find is that that range-finding tower becomes one of the biggest problems, because for anyone who's been to the museum, you can stand up on the roof and there is a wall around the roof that you can shelter behind. So if you're kneeling down, you're not visible to anyone, even in the building on the right-hand side. That's where Bidmead is. And what the Germans did was put themselves up there and just lob grenades over the sides, and various memoirs recount this, not least Pat Porteous. And Porteous, in his brief account, states, one of my subalterns, one of his section commanders, who had got up close to the tower, was killed when they dropped a grenade on him. He was a great friend of mine. I'd been best man at his wedding only 2 months before. Now, Porteous doesn't name who this officer was, and I really wanted to work out who it was. So I went through all of the losses that four commandos suffered D-Day, mainly through the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Officers in 4 Commando, and I think there were 4 killed in action that day. I could discount one of them. I knew that he had been killed at Pegasus Bridge later on in the day, but I still couldn't be certain about his identity because Porteous doesn't name him. And trying to find all of the section commanders in all of the different troops is not easy. But he says, I'd been best man at his wedding only 2 months before. Now, I'm terrible at family history and that sort of thing. However, my mother is very good at this, and she is excellent researcher for ancestry and that sort of thing. And she's actually a volunteer for the Royal School of Artillery's archives at Lark Hill. So I contacted her and said, look, I'm trying to work out an identity of someone. It's one of these 3 people. Can you tell me if any of them was married in the first half of 1944? And she came back, yes, with this gentleman, Lieutenant Michael Burness. And he was one of the 3 who had been killed on D-Day. And he had got married in April of 1944. So yeah, that was almost certainly him. I say almost, it's definitely him. And once I started to tie it in, I found some more corroborating information. Now, we've actually seen him before on one of my earliest slides, and here he is. I am 90% certain that's him, having just gone around the corner on that side road further east than the commandos were meant to be. And this again, after I'd written the book, after the book had been published, I was looking at this film footage again, thinking, I've seen that face. And I went back to this film footage and saw him here. I'm 90% certain that's Burness. Now, of course, he's D Troop. And again, that shows it wasn't just E and F troops that went too far along road. D Troop did as well. I've already established that B Troop did. And so this is, again, ties into my belief that all of the commandos, all 6 troops probably went too far along the road, not just E and F troopers, I'd supposed. Did he have children, Trevor? I don't know. That's another one for my mum.
Get mum onto it. Yeah.
I'll get my mum onto it and see if I can find out. As far as I'm aware, no. But I'll find out, actually, because that's an interesting question. I didn't really think of that at the time. So this tower creates all sorts of problems for the commandos as they advance. Now, after D troops secure their little bridgeheads, E and F troops then race across the anti-tank ditch to exploit. And Murdoch again recounts problems with the tower. Once they moved up towards this gun position in the foreground, they were then exposed to machine gun fire coming from the slit at the front, and they then engaged in a machine gun battle with the gunners in there. But whilst they were involved in this, and as they're preparing to leapfrog forward to reach these gun pits, his troop commander actually came back, having already got there, and reported to him that the gun pits were empty. There were no guns in these 6 gun positions. They had already been removed by the Germans. Now, the Allies kind of knew this. This is an intelligence summary from the 1st of June. This was written a bit later, but you can see that in this, they recount the intelligence summary that the number of guns, the 6 15-centimeter anti-ship guns, had been reduced to 3 in a report on the state of the Neptune batteries issued on the 1st of June. So the Allies already knew that 3 of the guns had gone. But, then as they state in there, afterwards none were present when the battery was visited. So, yeah, intelligence was always quite good, and they certainly were aware that half the guns had gone. But even if they'd removed all the guns, which of course they had, there's still the danger that they could have just been put back overnight. It would be very, very easy to return them to the battery. They did notice, the commandos, that all of the stocks of ammunition were there and complete. The only thing that was missing were the gun pieces themselves, and it wouldn't take long to reinstall them. Now, what had actually happened was they'd removed the guns so that they could build new enclosed emplacements.
It's the Merville Point de Hoc thing, isn't it? It's that development and getting Crisbeck as well, getting the guns under cover. And the fact they weren't there, if they had gone and they had been there after all, that's a bigger error than going in based on the idea that, well, we think they might have gone, but we're going to go in anyway, is a lesser mistake to make than assuming they've gone, and as you're saying, they're actually turning out to be there, and you've not done anything about it. And this is the commando remit, that they are for those jobs. That is, there is a high risk, and that that's it's what they do. Yeah.
And what was in place was, just like Point de Hoc, timbers, telegraph poles, and planks of wood to make it look as if there was a gun barrel in place. So the Germans knew what they were doing. They'd removed the guns back into the woods just north of Saint-Aubin, and actually 6 Commando find them as they make their advance to Pegasus Bridge just a couple of hours later. And they've put them there to remove them from danger whilst they're building the new casemates to protect them better from aerial attacks. And so it's the aerial attacks that have really had the success story here, because they've forced the Germans to withdraw the guns while they build new batteries. Exactly the same as happens at Point de Hoc.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly the same reason the guns are withdrawn, to shelter whilst they install better concrete casemates for them. And in many ways, this is something I always find interesting. The story of the Battle of Ouistreham is almost the same as Point de Hoc. The Allies attack with an elite commando formation, the US Rangers in the case of Point de Hoc, the commandos. 4 Commando are definitely one of the most experienced commando units that land on D-Day. They've already done Dieppe and various other raids. They are, one of the best units to take on this mission. And okay, they don't have the cliffs of Pont de Hoc that the Rangers have to face, but like I said, this is the only place on D-Day where there is, you know, proper urban fighting, and that brings its own challenges and makes, you know, it's its own individual challenge to actually get to this site and assault it. So it's the story of the Battle of Ouistreham is just as significant as the Battle of Pont de Hoc, just isn't in the movie, so it doesn't get the same coverage. Anyway, with the battery now known to be empty, the commandos, there is no point hanging around, and the Germans actually immediately bring down counterfire. So somebody somewhere has managed to get through to one of the other batteries nearby and called down some artillery fire on their position, which is pretty standard. The Germans are all in their bunkers, they're safe, the commandos are in the open, so bring down artillery fire and try and neutralize the threat that's swarming all over your battery. So the commandos withdraw as quickly as possible, taking with them a number of prisoners, including some Italians. I forget the unit that somebody told me this man would have almost certainly been part of, but basically one of the construction units working along the west wall. But yes, there were still many Italians in frontline service with the German army because they didn't have much choice. So even though Italy as a nation had surrendered to the Allies and now signed up with the Allies, many Italians on an individual level didn't have that option. They withdrew, and again, I can work out where this is. Those sports fields are still there. Bidmead recounts how they were carrying somebody on a stretcher away from the building that they'd been ensconced in. I can't say for definite that this is the same guy, or that Bidmead is in this picture. It's notable that two men here have berets. These are the only times you really see berets amongst Fort Commando. This particular piece of wall, we're back on the main road now. That wall is still there. So again, I can work out exactly where this is, and we're getting very close to the main junction where we saw the pajama-clad man. And the French, obviously, are satisfied with what's happening and putting up the tricolor. They feel liberated, and with good reason. What they don't realise is that the commandos are about to withdraw. But this leads us to the square where Bill Dawson is. And I forgot to mention this earlier. At the very start, whilst the commando is forming up, he takes an injury from a mortar round and is ordered pretty much by the medics to remain behind. He doesn't, though. He gets his head bandaged, perches his beret on top, and then comes into Ouistreham behind all of the commandos themselves. You can see he's not well. He's wrapped in a blanket, with his beret perched on top of a very bloodied bandage. He's got some of his HQ staff here because there's officers and signallers. And he stood in front of this building, and this was one of my favourite discoveries, and it shows just how much of a nerd I am. I thought, well, there's not much to go on. I wonder where this is, because this would imply this is where the command post is, if that's where Dawson is. And I looked at that wall and I thought, no, could I should be writing. But no, instead I went searching, and I looked very carefully at that wall, and then I didn't cycle the length of this. I used the benefit of modern technology at my disposal, and I used Google Maps and Google Street View to search for this piece of wall, and you can see a very distinct pattern, the mortar amongst the stones, and yeah, being sad, eventually I found that.
Oh yeah.
There's the outline of all of those stones and all of that mortar in that piece of wall. And yeah, there it is. It's that building. It's now an estate agent's, and it is right on the main junction where we saw our pajama-clad man earlier. That road just behind with the cars parked on it is the road that leads down to Pegasus Bridge. Now, of course, you've got the dual carriageway out of Ouistreham, but in 1944, that was the main road south. So this is almost certainly where the CP for Fort Commando was. Thank you, Colin. Yeah, this is then where all of the commandos gathered on their return as they made their way back towards the main road, and then pretty much as per their orders, having made this attack, having guaranteed that the gun battery was neutralized, well, they had a brief chance for some R&R. There were lots of locals around to plug them with wine and probably Calvados there. These are some of the French commandos. You can see France written on the shoulder of the gent on the right. The guy on the left is also French commando. We see him a little bit later in the footage as well. Have I worked out which building this is? No, I haven't, I'm afraid. That's a wooden trellis which has long since been removed.
You need some catalogue for a 1930s French garden centre to find out what type of trellis that is, who sold it, and
I did try and work it out, but I kind of gave up. I think if I persevered, I might find some clues. Like, can you see there's a tiny bit of brickwork above that guy on the left? Maybe I could use that. But I did draw a line and I gave up.
Terry is asking about how many, the Germans left behind at the strong point, because that you've gone there, they're pulling back because the guns aren't there. Is there still an active presence around the port at this time?
So the commandos take as many prisoners with them as they can. Now, the French commandos, Kiefer manages to get into the casino and the strong point, and they pull out several prisoners. One of those prisoners then lobs a grenade, and so he's machine gunned along with several of the other prisoners, understandably, I would say. But they do take several prisoners with them, and the strong point, the casino, is sort of emptied, but could, of course, be very easily reoccupied. Alexander Lofi with 8 troops, they attack strongpoint 10. They do not manage to neutralize it. They withdraw instead under Dawson's orders because they've done enough to subdue the strongpoint, but it would take too long to actually overcome it. So they leave it. And the men inside, I think it's Lieutenant Kurubach, no, it's a sergeant, Feldwebel Kurubacha or something like that. I managed to identify him from some of the prisoner of war statements. They surrender later on. In fact, they probably surrender to one of Joseph Patterson's orderlies. Patterson recounts how he received information that there were some wounded up by the beach. He sends one of his orderlies with a jeep, and that orderly then returns with something like 24 prisoners, which incenses Patterson because he doesn't have any means to look after prisoners of war. He remains in Ouistreham whilst the commando withdraw, and here you can see them withdrawing back up the road, back towards the landing area at Hermanville. They're heading west again, back to the landing area where they'll then turn south and head towards Pegasus Bridge. Joseph Patterson remains with his aid post. And so, yes, he's sending his orderlies out to pick up wounded. He's going around in a jeep himself. And, one of his orderlies returns with, something like 24 prisoners, which, does not please Patterson at all. But it's interesting to note that one of these prisoners of war statements from Strongpoint 10, he says, we surrendered to a jeep that was passing by. And I think that might be the same instance. So Strongpoint 10 gives up like that. Strongpoint 8 and Bass, the gun position, the British do not clear all of the bunkers, and they definitely do not clear the range finding tower. They can't get into it. It's got an armored door and it's all concrete. They give up trying to get in and they withdraw, leaving the Germans to their own devices. They actually surrender 2 days late. 2 days later. To a Royal Engineer who is walking around the battlefield inspecting various defences, and he suddenly realises there's this tower. He says, I should go in there. And so he goes to try and blow up the door to get in, which he succeeds. And the first thing that happens is, I forget how many, I think he says 50. It probably wasn't quite that many, but a very large number of Germans then come down the stairs with their hands up. There are still other Germans in Ouistreham, so the strong point at the canal locks, the commandos don't get to that, and it's actually 77 Assault Squadron Royal Engineers with their Hobart Funnies, armoured vehicle Royal Engineers, that attack the lock gates in the afternoon of D-Day to neutralise that strong point and to secure the locks. There are numerous other Germans in the south of the town. There are still snipers firing throughout the day. So Ouistreham still has Germans in it. But for Commando, their mission was to neutralise the gun battery. With that achieved, they now have another mission, which is to catch up with Lovett's 1st Special Service Brigade, get across the river and reinforce the airborne landings on the east side of the Orne. So their mission was not liberation or occupation, for want of a better word. Their mission was to neutralize something and then leave. They will leave it to the follow-up troops, the beach groups, to secure an area and to basically take all of the Germans prisoner. They don't have the time or the facilities to do that. So no, they did leave Germans in Strongpoint 8, but there is nothing that those Germans can do now. They've been bypassed. They don't have any offensive weaponry in the form of the 150mm guns. So yeah, they're just left to their own devices. They'll work out pretty quickly that there's no point carrying on fighting. They are surrounded and done for. So
yeah.
The commandos withdraw back to the landing area, taking their prisoners with them. They leave them at the beach. And then Laws suffers an accident. His camera is damaged, and so he's reduced to taking still photography for the rest of the day. And here he captures 4 Commando on the other side of the river. This is next to the quarries just to the north of Pegasus and Horsa Bridge, where they rest up for the night, actually, before joining the front line with the rest of the 1st Special Service Brigade. And their mission in Ouistreham is done, and that is largely the battle for Ouistreham completed. Like I said, 77 Assault Squadron go in later in the afternoon to clear up the strong points surrounding the lock gates. That is, another part of the battle for Ouistreham, if you like, but I've already talked for long enough, so I shall leave it there. What I will say, though, and I said this because I gave, some of you may recognize this talk I gave at We Have Ways. This sort of research is only possible because of the fantastic array of resources that we as historians have available to us. And the National Archives has all of our official records, the war diaries, the orders, the reports filed by the Army, the Royal Navy, that sort of thing. It is a goldmine of information. It is absolutely wonderful. The Imperial War Museum is an archive that so many people have submitted their own personal papers and documents to. They have the catalogue of all of the official photography taken on D-Day and the film footage. But yes, lots of personal and private papers filed by veterans as they retire. And yeah, there's a whole mine of that. And I know there is the debate about how easily accessible that is and whether it could be improved. But the fact is, it is there and it is accessible. It's not always easy, but it is a rich resource of information. And so much of it is online as well. All of these oral archives, the effort behind digitizing and putting online tens of thousands, I presume, oral archives and film footage, that is an incredible resource that we have available to us. And then there's all of the other smaller museums, the regimental museums, the museums in France, the local museums, and places like the D-Day story, where, like I said, some of this information has come from. Without this sort of information, we would not be able to tell these stories. And I'm pleased, I'm really happy that it is still possible to tell these stories. It's not easy. It takes a huge depth of research. I think everyone knows how long I spent on this and the depth that I've gone into. I think it was worth it because I'm so happy with this as a record of what happens on Sword Beach on D-Day, even accepting that small error.
And we should be grateful. We should be grateful that people are interested as well. Because there's some people out there do work on things that the public have no interest in. I can't give you examples, but there are people all sorts of weird hobbies that, I don't know, catalog the number of different types of acorn in a particular forest or something. I don't know, but people aren't interested in it in a broad sense. But what is gratifying to you and all the other people like Michael Ackerman who come on doing this granular work is there is an interest for it. You've mentioned the fact that there are these books that dismiss some of these battles with a paragraph or two or a sentence or two, but people are interested in a decent account providing it's written well, which of course your book is. And I think, you know, as someone myself, you know, my great uncle was on Sword Beach, and he always got the, well, you guys didn't take Caen D-Day, so you failed, kind of was kind of the summary he would deal with. And he's like, well, okay, yes, there's a little bit more to it than that, but sure. But it's Sword Beach was ripe for a better discussion. And, you know, I think a lot of people who are watching this or watching it later on, particularly British tourists coming, they're all a bit guilty of, you've just got off the ferry, you're thinking about getting out of Ouistreham to go somewhere that in your mind is cooler. You're off to Omaha Beach, you're off to Pegasus Bridge, you're off to wherever it be, Armoured. But actually, while you're driving out of Ouistreham, despite the fact there isn't a huge amount to see, although there is the Grand Bunker, there is some monuments, you're passing what was an epic, pretty epic battle with lots of human interest, lots of drama. And as you said at the beginning, you know, it's infantry and tank cooperation. It's moving into an urban environment. It's the potential of friendly fire, lots of navigation, intelligence, information coming there. What the Germans got. It's a really, really, really complicated battle. And I think there'll be people who will maybe just stop for an hour before they leave Ouistreham, which is great.
Yeah, I hope people do. Yeah, and thank you everyone for all of the support and enthusiasm and the number of people buying this. It's in Tesco. I've never imagined
Tesco's. Yeah.
It would be in Tesco. Not only that, it's in Tesco in my hometown of Amesbury as well. And
you do your surreptitious going in and signing as well. So yeah, and remember, folks, there's another book on Sword Beach by another author, but you know which one you need to get first. I'll say no more. It's the one with Stephen Fisher under the title, not someone else.
They are very different books, to be fair. So I've written a detailed history of what happened on Sword Beach because I think, you know, it needed doing for the first time. This Omaha Beach, you can buy a book about Omaha Beach that's the equivalent of mine, that tells you who went up what path and, you know, exactly which house they cleared, because people have gone into that granular level of detail to uncover, you know, what happened on Omaha. And I wanted to do the same for Sword. But at the same time, there's plenty of other types of narratives of what happens on Omaha, and Max has written a different book altogether. He's written a history of the British Army, or the story of the British Army in 1944, using Sword as a backdrop. So they're not the same book. They're not in competition with each other.
You're ever the diplomat, Steve. And people are asking, is there stuff about the Suffolk Regiment in the book? Yes, the Suffolks, the Southlanks, all the other units that are there as well. Yeah. People are asking, is Gold Beach up next, Stephen? History in Your Hand is asking that.
So the book I'm currently working on is Walcheren and Operation Infatuate, the landing on Walcheren on the 1st of November 1944. Where actually we follow 4 Commando again, and several of the other Commando units that land on D-Day, including the French Commandos. And I've chosen that, and I've said this before, but it bears repeating again. If I wrote Gold Beach immediately after Sword Beach, it would be like writing Sword Beach 2. Or if you've seen Speed and you've seen Speed 2, it's just the same story with different actors. And it's not that it's the same story. Gold Beach is, again, its own distinct event. But from my point of view, for me personally, if I wrote what happens on Gold immediately after I write Sword, it would be too similar. And I needed to write something different before I could go back to Gold and treat it again. Otherwise, it would feel like I was copying what had happened in Sword and just transplanting it to Gold. So that was my choice, to do something different. I mean, it's still very similar. It's an amphibious landing. It just happens to be in November.
Different country, though. Different country.
Country, yeah.
So I mean, we're looking with
Gold will come. Gold definitely deserves a similar treatment, because everything that I said about Sword in my intro, the lack of publications about it, is true of Gold as well. There is no equivalent to this for Gold Beach, and there needs to be. Because Utah's had that treatment, Omaha's had that treatment, Juneau has to a certain extent had that treatment. It's just Sword and Gold that have been missing this entire time.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, we will leave it. So, folks, I'm back with Ian McGregor tomorrow talking about the men behind the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, both American and Japanese and civilians and things like that involved. So I'm looking forward to that one. More stuff coming your week. Click like and subscribe. And don't forget to buy my guests' books. And so with that, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for your fantastic questions. I will see you all next time. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.